So, welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews, where we discuss with local business owners their backgrounds, their successes, their challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this afternoon, I'm delighted to have with us Nick Prescott, who's CEO at Vambrace Cybersecurity. So, firstly, Nick, thank you for spending a bit of time with us. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, Vambrace, what you do, how you help people, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Hi there, and thank you very much for your time there. So I've been CEO of Vambrace Cybersecurity for about 8 months now, and the history of the company has gone on for about kind of 3, 4 years. And basically, we're a cybersecurity consultancy and professional services firm. So we do kind of professional services advisory around what's called governance, risk, and compliance, and cybersecurity strategy. Um, but what we also do is provide kind of business as usual operational services around security monitoring, penetration testing, incident response. We also do bits and pieces on software development, kind of making sure that code is all secure, but really do a lot of stuff around security awareness training as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, what would be the sort of perfect client for you? What makes a great client for to work with, Nick?
Usually we go for companies around 50 to 1,500 people, and there can be startups or scale ups. They could be long established businesses, or they could be kind of new businesses kind of looking for that security expertise and advisory. Security, cybersecurity is an ever changing paradigm.
Yeah.
It all comes in different flavors. The big flavor at the moment is the kind of human risk indicator, because a lot of the technologies have been put in place that makes the cost of attack a lot higher. And it's about kind of the fallacy of the human mind, really. It's really where the cyber attackers are getting quite clever.
Right. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating because it's relevant right now. I believe that in the US, they're suggesting Iranian hackers have managed to get into one or two accounts over there quite recently. So I'm sure it's,
Oh, yeah. I mean, gone are the days where, a hack on Twitter is something, oh, that's interesting. It happens the whole day. I think the latest one we saw was Claude AI, which is a large language model, AI
yes.
language model. Their code was kind of left out in the open, and it was left for vulnerabilities. So, even people that generate LLMs and code
Wow.
alignment, is all being exposed. So I don't think a day goes past where there's been a report of a cyber hack on a business or an entity or an institution. It's happening the whole time. But
Wow.
I think, the big ones last year that we saw in 2025 around Jaguar Land Rover and Marks and Spencers. And
Yes.
to be honest, those are the ones that kind of really sparked the dinner party conversation.
Yes.
And I suppose in a way, I've been in cybersecurity for 16, 17 years now. And when it first started off, it was like, you're in cybersecurity. It was a 5 minute conversation, and then the person spoke to the other person and thought I was a bit dull. But now it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not so much a hacker, but how do I protect my personal data?
Yeah.
So the digital identities, the blur between the personal and professional lives, are somewhat blurring into your corporate
Yes.
digital identity from your personal identity. If it's on a device and it can be hacked, it's fair game to the bad guys.
Yeah, yeah, no, mate, yeah, makes absolute sense. And I guess just the more and more technology we've got, the more at risk we are, I assume. So Nick, maybe we can start you tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into business and why this particular one for you.
Yeah, so after a short spell in the military and some other kind of areas, I kind of got into recruitment of all places. Kind of trying to get people hired, and it was originally in the European IT market. And then around 2007, someone came up to me and said, have you ever heard of CISSP, which is the Certified Information System Security Professional? And that was a kind of, a kind of hot kind of qualification to get. And so I basically, I remember it very clearly. And someone said, okay, go and find some people that have got CISSP. And from that, I kind of got into the world of recruiting cybersecurity people. And then really after that, I kind of thought, well, maybe kind of get into sales. So I worked for an Israeli company that did software licensing, software license tokens. And we kind of, got into the app, but then I kind of got into direct sales. And then around 2010, 2011, I got into the world of consulting, and basically kind of using all my sales knowledge to deliver solutions. Then I did a couple of in-house roles. So I was an information security analyst in-house, then information security manager, and then kind of got back into consultancy. And then I kind of went up what's called GRC, which is governance, risk and compliance. Did a standard called ISO 27001. I used to be what's called a payment security card, what's called a PCI QSA. So I did some kind of like security frameworks. And then I kind of about 2016, 2017, kind of was part of a consultancy team. And then around, for 2026 now, on so about, yeah, just after COVID, I kind of got into the kind of what we call the virtual CISO world, the virtual Chief Information Security, and that was doing advising security at a strategic and tactical layer, advising boards, doing risk assessments, really kind of merging cyber into a business operations. And then last year, kind of set up on my own and got invited to be part of Vambrace and been CEO for the last 8 months. So I've had a varied career of sales, business development, consulting, and now I'm managing. And then for my sins, I used to be a local government councillor. So that was
Wow.
that gave the real leadership experience as well. So I was
Yes.
leader of a borough council during COVID. So yeah, to talk about leadership and management. So it's all those experiences have fallen into the pot of where I am
All
now.
come together to make you. Oh, amazing. And looking back, what are some of the biggest issues and challenges you've had to overcome, Nick?
Wow. Oh, in what context?
I guess whether it's the business or you personally, in terms of the work that you've done, the career you've had, what are some of the things that you, if you're able to share them with us, is what are some of the challenges you can remember?
Well, so I can't get into the stuff I've done with clients because obviously,
Yeah.
I have to protect the
Yeah.
confidentiality of clients as well. But I think really is that there are so many different scenarios, whether it be on a proactive or reactive basis. So I have been involved where large companies I've worked with have been hacked, and it's kind of usually around 4:30 on a Friday afternoon because that's when the hackers know when you're going to be quiet, right? So they
Right.
there's lots of there's lots of different angles, but I can give you an example. I mean, I remember one time I was having a steak dinner in a well-known chain, and you know, um, the phone rings and I kind of ignore it first time, and then it rings again. I thought, well, I better, and then it rings again. I thought I better ring this. And then and basically went, well, there's been an incident with my family again. Oh, there's been another cyber breach. Yeah, there's been another incident. So you kind of have to run in, but you in that scenario, you are basically kind of it's an instant. It's
Yeah.
what the emergency services call the golden hour. You are trying to analyze, triage, and escalate the situation as well.
Yes.
So I mean, but there have been other times actually. I mean, I was in Madrid, for example, 5 o'clock in the morning, and being honest, I've been out the night before, and then suddenly, you have your phone on silent, but it was absolutely flashing code red, and you do have those moments where you have to kind of orientate, observe,
Yeah.
and then basically go right. What is going on, and that kind of comes from the military data. You're trying to get a battle space picture of what is going on,
Yeah.
what systems are being affected. And that requires, quick decision making
Yes.
leadership in terms of right, let's stop talking, let's start doing. But those have happened ups and downs in the career. But usually, on the other time when you're doing a normal project is getting people to buy into the project is,
Yes.
people still think, and less now, but people still think security is that kind of one floor below the IT basement. And they're just a bunch of weirdos, not really understanding how the business runs, and they're kind of paranoid about everything and focused about nothing.
Yeah, I guess I suppose it's one of those things where I don't know it's happening more and more, but you know it's front and center. Everything's fine till it happens, and then it's front and center, and like get it fixed quick. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I would imagine it's. I remember my background before doing this was in power generation, and we used to work on coal-fired power stations going back a few years, and I remember the they used to call them the centre desk guy. So you'd have like three or most power stations have several units of generation, if you like,
Oh, yeah,
several
yeah, yeah,
machines running, if you like. And then there was a centre guest. So each one had its own controller, bloke sitting there, and then you had the centre desk guy. His job was just to be there, ready. So you'd often walk in and he'd be reading the paper or just doing a crossword or whatever. And he wasn't paid to do that. He was paid for the point at which something went really wrong. He would jump into action and fix stuff really quickly.
yeah,
And you know,
yeah.
it was fascinating. But the rest of the time, you wouldn't know he was in many ways.
Yeah, and the thing is, in those scenarios, you might, say, "Oh, you just, sitting there eating biscuits and reading the paper." But when it all does kick off,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
when the start happens. But really, it's understanding how you keep the tempo of the response and the recovery, and
yes,
knowing when it's going to end. You don't know when it's going to end.
yes,
No one can tell you when it's going to end, and actually, when you've been on it for a good week or 2 weeks and it does end, you suddenly kind of have that moment of oh well, it's oh right, okay, that's it, it's over. What do I do now?
yes.
Go back to reading the paper and eating biscuits until the next one. Yeah,
No, it's fascinating. No, I mean, it's really interesting that analogy because this guy was the highest paid person there. You know, it was just like his job was solving problems in you
yeah.
know in the moment, and it's such a valuable thing to do. But
Well,
no,
there's that good meme going around with the story of there's that big ship engine, and it's a very complex beast of a super tanker engine, and it's like the bill is $100,000, and as they're saying, oh, well, how come you took 5 minutes fixing it? And it's like, well, 5 minutes fixing it, the other $999,000 is all about the knowledge, experience, and what to do at the right
absolutely,
time at the right place, and that's the real value to it. And I think just despite all the advances of AI, it's you need the human Mark One eyeball and the human brain to work out when to apply the right control and when, and you know whether it's normal project proactive work or a responsive incident, you have no idea of
yes,
things go up, things go down, things go sideways, things go south, north, east, and west. But
yeah.
as long as you have that learning experience, to kind of make sure, okay, that scenario happened, how do you prevent it again, is kind of really key.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So, I mean, obviously, you've had so many different roles in business in general, for through sales and obviously you said leadership and obviously CEO now. What are some of the things you've learned about running and growing successful businesses?
I think basically it's communication and transparency. That is really, really fundamental, and making sure is from a leadership perspective is setting the right culture. I think there's a famous American guy that's strategy culture for breakfast, but everyone seems to think it's with the Wolf of Wall Street. The kind of Wolf. But really, it's about teamwork culture and kind of communication and setting expectations. Having a clear set of roles and responsibilities. And I've seen it's kind of middle management, lower management, upper management, whatever you want to call it. Is don't fall into the thing. Well, if it sounds good, it must be okay. Is question and validate and kind of trust on results and outputs. It's like, how can we do things better? And I've seen loads of times where people are owning sales processes. They get a technical guy or someone's like challenging. Um, they're like challenging the why are you looking at my sales pipeline? So we're not there to challenge it. We're there to make it better.
Yeah,
We're there to put some technical expertise and better. And we have a thing in our business where we'll have a client requirement, and we put it in a team chat called the interest room, and basically it will be like, okay, I had a chat with this client. and we'll get someone from marketing, we'll get someone from sales, we'll get someone from technical, um, get someone from finance or whatever, and then we'll just say, okay, how do we package this scenario and deliver it? Um, kind of got the interest room for project, and then we've got the hot room for instance. So it's really saying is that it's making sure that each team member has the best kind of logistics in place, the best support, and understanding of the wider picture. Because one of the things I certainly learned when I was younger is there were kind of two golden rules. Make sure you have a notebook and pen, which is pretty obvious. But be amazed how many people don't record things, and all these AI note takers, for example, has made that job a lot easier. But also that kind of notion saying the lowest paid kid with the best idea wins, and that can come at all levels as well.
Yeah,
Sometimes you might have an old dad pan who's kind of 15 years battle scars, seen it all before, knows 110% of every scenario, but the new kid on the block, the graduate, suddenly sticks their hands up and go, "Hang on, I've got an idea." And that wins the day. And you've
brilliant.
got to have that right culture in place to show that yeah, that's how you improve the situation.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I think you're aware we're a business coaching organisation. I'm just keen to know the best coaches you've worked with, whether that's business, sport, life in general. Who's had the biggest impact on you?
Oh, I think it's really interesting. So obviously, yeah, in terms of coaching, I suppose in a way there's been different paradigms. And that is, when you do things in the military, everything's all written down. You have a standard operating procedure, and everything's one, two, three, left, right, left, right,
Yeah,
left, right, and it's very prescribed. The hierarchy is rigid. Um, well, not necessarily rigid, but things are kind of waterfall model down.
yeah,
And there's a clear structure and scope of operations. However, I think when you've been a council leader, you're in charge of a political group. You're not their boss. They're not your employees. And they can get rid of you. And if over 50% don't like you, stick your hand up and that's it. You're off.
yeah,
I mean, it was never quite that bad. But again, you have to constantly buy for their support. You're constantly having a very different leadership model where you have to get them to support you, where it's kind of inverted in the other way. And I think also in things like sports as well, when you do things like coaching is, when you play sports like tennis or squash, if you bugger up, oh sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but if you
all good,
if,
all
if
good.
if if you don't if you don't do well, you can't just say, well, the guy next door to me, he didn't do it right. And so it puts a lot of the kind of responsibility and accountability on there as well. But I think with team sports, it becomes a bit more, look at like kind of rugby, for example. You can't, okay, the guy scores on the try line at the end, but in order to get there
Yeah,
requires, multiple kind of different things happening at the right
yeah,
time at the right place. So it's having that experience, and what I would say is, is having that diversity of thought within an organization is really cool. And what I mean is, the lowest paid kid with the best idea, but someone to look at things and challenge from a from
yes,
from a perspective. I mean, I see a lot of the times when you ask for feedback, because of a kind of hierarchical structure, they kind of don't give feedback.
absolutely.
But then again, in a council environment, you'd be amazed how many kind of ward councillors you've got something uppity about planning application. Oh, they've got apps. They won't hold anything back. They'll just fire both barrels into you and make you feel personally responsible. But I think in the key in that case is the balance of making sure that, you know, when you work in a bit more of a hierarchical environment, and that, people when they kind of see the guy in charge with people underneath them, they don't want to kind of they're quite happy to tell you on a one-to-one basis. Um, in a council, maybe not so. But in a group environment, they don't want to stick their head above the parapet,
Yeah,
and kind of be outspoken. And sometimes, you have to foster that discussion. Sometimes you have to say, look, this is the elephant in the room. Come on, guys,
yeah,
let's discuss it. Let's
yes,
discuss it. Because people don't have that perspective, and I think also is making sure that people feel heard in a group environment. and I especially think that's really important when people are working kind of remotely. I always find it amusing that you can work anywhere in the world as long as it's in the office. But all the benefits of that,
Yeah.
people need that collaboration. They need that water cooler moment. And it, got, when I first started work, you kind of got told off for turning up late. You sat there and, reading the newspaper in your lunch hours, a kind of absolute cardinal sin. Well,
Yeah.
when you work from home, how can you be late for work? You just log on and you're at work, reading the newspaper at lunchtime. Well, who's going to find out?
Yeah.
And, there are lots of places where the people are kind of monitoring to make sure people are tapping on keyboards. But I think really the key thing is making sure you have trust, and that goes north, south, east, west as well. Having that collaboration, having that team environment, and it very easy as a leader to let that culture slip into people's kind of what they feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
It's all about, if people can get comfortable being uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is sharing problems, deliberating, making sure that workflow process in place. On the whole, it generates a much more positive culture.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And whether it's from the the organisations or your background, do you have any favourite quotes or sayings you picked up over time that you catch yourself using on a regular basis about business or success?
I think those that know me love my analogies, love my film quotes, and whatever. Now you're putting me on the spot because
Oh, good.
I didn't have any pre-prepared, but um, I think I mean, one of the ones I really like actually is, it's a bit tongue in cheek, but there's this film called Margin Call with Jeremy Irons. I don't know whether you've heard that one.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it.
And it's trying to mimic the whole collapse of, the Lehman Brothers and all this stuff.
Yes,
But
right. Yep.
there's a really good scene. I think, it's like 4 o'clock in the morning. And, Jeremy Irons talked to this other guy. I think the other guy's Sam Blackman or something. But anyway, Jeremy Irons had his like moment. And he said, "What are the three things I told you? You're either first, you're smarter, or you cheat." And we don't cheat. So you're either first or you're smarter. And I think that is a really good one in terms of business, because a lot of people are saying, "Oh, we've got to do something new. We've got to do something new. So we've got to be first at everything."
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, so what if you're first? If you think of like this kind of big battle between Microsoft and Apple, someone came out with a touchscreen. Well, Microsoft came out with a touchscreen. Apple made it better. They did, things like,
Yeah.
but then again, you look at things like, the iPod. It basically Apple came out with the iPod, and then Microsoft came out with the Zune player. But the Zune player was better, but it wasn't smarter than the
Yeah.
iPod. So, that I do find that one a really good one, because, this kind of mentality, oh, let's do something that no one else has done before. Okay, well, really, you just got to be smarter about it. And also the kind of not cheating is the trust and integrity part,
Yes.
which I think is really, really important within the business. So that's the one that comes
Brilliant.
to the top of my head. And I suppose the other one was one kind of from the military. There was a guy called General Field Marshal the Lord Slim, who was a soldier. He was in Burma, went from a private all the way up to a field marshal. I know the quote is, the balance between discipline and freedom, and this is really important in terms of workflow. So the discipline is that when you ride your bicycle, you've got to make sure the tires are pumped up, the lights work, and the brakes are working, and he was in the army, so you had to wear the right shade of khaki green and all that. But also freedom was you're allowed to go wherever you like, and I think
Right.
that there's a really interesting paradigm in that sense, because what you've got there is that balance between, and it's the same with, salespeople, finance people, when you're working with complex systems, you've got to have the discipline to kind of do the 1 to 10 steps. The
Yeah.
freedom is that you can, using that process and sticking to that process and making sure it's repeatable and scalable, people know what you're doing and you get the certainty of the outcome. The freedom is you can go off and do the things you want to do.
Yeah. No, that makes yeah, absolute perfect sense. And like, is any favourite books or podcasts you can recommend that you watch or listen to?
Um, so yeah, books is an interesting one because I think even from a young age, my parents were saying, what are you doing? Nothing. We'll read books. And then I kind of thought, no, I can't be bothered to read books. I'm too busy. But I do a lot of reading. I suppose in the modern context, my wife says I have to do too much doom scrolling, but I'm not just looking at Twitter or Instagram. I'm probably reading endless newspaper articles,
Yes,
and stuff along those lines. So, I mean, reading books is probably, I've got a huge bookcase in here. So over the years, I have read books, yeah. But to be honest, when I get Christmas presents and I get like, big fat 1,000-page books, I'm a bit like, "Oh, I haven't got time to do that."
absolutely. Yeah,
But in terms of podcasts, I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously my political days is, there are lots of different political podcasts out there, and I think my degree was in history and politics. It was nothing to do with cybersecurity. I just
right.
kind of learned
Interesting.
that learn that along the way. But I think the key is making sure, with history, is that you're telling that story from A to B. Politics, you're understanding the different various angles, and I think it's really dangerous, especially in this day and age, is validate and verify information that you get,
Yes,
and you do have to make judgment calls based on a lack of complete information. And that's the kind of scenario of it all.
brilliant. And you're just sticking with learning for a second. What would you say you've learned about yourself throughout your journey so far, Nick?
Learn about myself. What, since an hour
Yeah,
ago, a week ago, a month ago? I
since
mean, I think, yeah. The reason why I kind of repeat the question back to you in a way is
yeah,
that I'm constantly learning, and I think there are sometimes it feels a bit too easy to give up on things, and actually
yep,
you kind of keep on going, and you make an analysis and go, well, that's not looking too good. I go off and do something else, and then sometimes you think, no, actually, I need to stick on it, and I don't think anyone really has a complete information picture of what's going to happen. Um, and I think, you do have to make judgment calls, and, people talk about the head and the heart and the instinct. But again, that comes through having that really wide variety of understanding. And I think the thing is, they always say, if you're going to make a big decision, sleep over it. And I think
mm,
what that really means is, not necessarily sleep over it, but put yourself in a different state of mind.
yes,
Try and always understand what the other person's trying to achieve,
yep,
especially in negotiation. Is the moment. I'm not a particularly great poker player. In fact, I've only played it twice, and every single time I played it, someone said, "You play this a lot," and I went, "No, not really." But I think psychologically is, when you're in that negotiation, is understand what the other person's win criteria is. And
yes,
and I think once you understand that, then you can understand where the win-win happens for both
yep.
parties.
No, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so looking forward a little bit now, what does the future look like for you and Vambrace Cybersecurity, and what challenges do you think you might face, if any?
I think the really key thing is it's very much a buyer's market. If you think of AI and SaaS, it's very easy to buy stuff. I think, professional services, consultancy is making sure the sales cycle is efficient and effective. People want to have answers and outcomes. In this world of where you can buy absolutely anything on Amazon, you don't want to feel you have to go to the shop and have a long discussion with the salesperson and say, "Can we order it in?" It's like, well, no, I can go to Amazon and get a better price. So I think that's coming into the commercial space. I think really it's about leveraging efficiency and effectiveness, and I think people that become dependent upon AI for decisions and not use it as decision support, um, especially in our world, I think that's a real challenge.
Mm,
Every technical solution is like, oh, it's got AI, but what does that actually do?
yeah,
I think there is certain change in the software and technology markets, especially in the US. Big US global companies are shelving off, tens of thousands of workers, and then they're rehiring them. because they realize that AI isn't this panacea of everything, and it kind of goes in cycles. They'll hire 10,000 people, fire 10,000 people, and then they'll hire another 20,000 people.
Yeah,
So I think the real challenge is making sure it is having that right customer base, and people want to speak to the expert. They want good service. They don't want to be treated as a number.
yeah.
You don't want to get locked as some kind of AI driven customer services process. I understand that helps, but people want to get quicker resolutions, and people's patience, I think, is not as long as it used to be.
No, that makes sense. And Nicola, within Actually Coach yourself, one of our key definitions of a true business is a commercial, profitable enterprise that works without its leaders and its owners. In terms of it becoming self-sustaining. How do you feel about that as a definition?
Um, it depends. Well, I mean, again, it's like if you look at things in a military context. I mean, that's based on the basis of the head guy, not there, or head person's not there.
Yes.
It's self-sustaining. You can still carry out the mission at hand, and
Yep.
um, in politics. That's debatable, isn't it? Depends how long Keir. No, I'm only joking. It depends how long Keir Starmer's in power, right? But then again, you do have scenarios where you have that strong leader, and once that goes, that structure below them, kind of goes as
Yes.
well. I think on an operational basis is obviously you need to make that self-sustaining, especially in a high availability managed environment. You need to make sure that those processes are robust and they are repeatable. Um, I think with regards to the kind of you take the head off the snake, you still got the snake type scenario instead of strategy and tactics. That does require that operational tempo to kind of carry over that kind of dead ground in their strategy and tactics. And I think that's where having that medium long term view from leadership is really key.
Yeah. Brilliant. Brilliant. And final question, what would be the best advice you could give an 18-year-old you if you could go back in time and do that, Nick?
Oh, 18 years old. So that's the time when you leave school and not quite university. And I would just say is don't get that wide experience. Go traveling, see different cultures, understand how the world outside you works.
Yeah.
I think it's there's always I think there was this Alan, I can't remember his name, but there's this philosopher guy, I think it's called Alan Johnson or whatever, and he said you're born, you go to school, you go, you're there to get good grades, and there's always this competitive, it's a bit of a rat race. You leave school, you go to university, you've got to get a good job, and then you get a house, get married, and and then he was saying, oh, when you're 40, 45, you kind of realize you've made it. But that I think is quite interesting because it's like, well, what is the definition of making it? Is the definition of making it because you're rich or content, you go, whatever. And I think, for an 18-year-old is, when you've gone through the whole schooling process, is it's all about getting good grades. It's all about kind of fitting and understanding the world. But you need to see that time outside your bubble. You need to see
Yes.
that time of understanding is that the world is a very is a big and diverse place, but it's very connected.
Yeah.
And don't rush into it's a lot easier when you're 18 to rush into something and then pull out when you don't like it. But I think when you're older, when you have longer term commitments, when you have a longer term plan, you don't want to make sure you're unhappy with the world that you're in. And so you kind of need to test it out a lot more at 18 and have, build up that risk tolerance and appetite to let things go wrong.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, there's that whole learning piece, isn't there? 18, it's sort of there's still so much more to learn, I think. It's so
Yeah,
somebody said
yeah,
to me recently, which I thought was really interesting, was at 18, basically at 19, or you become an adult at 18. So at
Yeah,
19, you're a 1 year old adult. So the idea you should be able to make all those choices there's still lots to learn. Um,
yeah, yeah. And to be honest, learning is a lifelong thing.
yes.
But I think there's two. Don't feel the pressure to conform just because what other people feel is the right thing to do. Do what makes you happy.
Sound advice. Do what makes you happy. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
Nick,
brilliant.
Nick, it's been fascinating to touch you, and I really appreciate your time for spending time with me.
Cheers.
And for anyone that's watching would like to get in touch with you or Vambrace Cybersecurity, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, so website's vambrace.co.uk. I'm sure I might be in security, but I'm not sneaky beaky. I'm on LinkedIn. So you'll find me by putting my name in. I get 10 requests a day for that, so that's never ending. So go to our website. We've got everything we've got in there.
Thank you. Well, look, it'd be great to swing by another 6, 12 months and just see what's going on for you then.
Yeah.
But for now, thank you for your time.
Cheers. Thanks a lot. No worries.
Thank you.